Emmanuel Navon. Why is Algeria choosing this moment to formalize its colonial grievance with France?
Because Algeria is essentially at this point a failed state ruled by a failed leadership. And instead of getting a life and turning their country into a success, this failed leadership is trying to blame France over and over again to diffuse the frustration of the Algerian population over unemployment and over the lack of freedom in that country. And that's what this leadership has been doing for years, always to blame France for a colonial period that ended, as your report said, more than 60 years ago. There are many countries in the world today, in fact, most countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, and elsewhere, that freed themselves from colonialism, and that many of them have become success stories since then. Instead of recessing the past, they build a future. But as I said, Algeria is essentially a failed state, ruled by a failed leadership that tries to blame France for its own failures.
How seriously is France likely to take this law, and could it trigger a real diplomatic rupture here?
Well, unfortunately, the French president has been very weak vis-a-vis Algeria. Instead of having a tough stance on Algeria, don't forget that only a couple of weeks ago, a French-Algerian intellectual and author, Boualem Sansal, who had been jailed in Algeria, was freed, not thanks to France, but mostly thanks to Germany. Unfortunately, President Macron, instead of being tough on Algeria, has been putting up with all those provocations. He has a very large Algerian population in France that is very, part of it is very violent, living in the suburbs. And instead of facing this restless youth in his own country, he's been trying to appease the Algerian regime. I think that France needs also another leadership that will defend the honor of France instead of appeasing those provocations coming from Algeria.
You know, with tensions already high over issues like Western Sahara and migration, does this push France and Algeria relations into a more confrontational phase? Or, you know, what does France ultimately need from Algeria, vice versa?
Well, France doesn't need anything from Algeria. France is a great power. It has the world's fifth biggest economy, a nuclear weapon, a permanent seat at the Security Council. Algeria, as I said, is a mostly failed state that lives off its natural gas exports, that is aligned with Russia and China, that spreads instability in North Africa. You mentioned Western Sahara. Algeria supports separatist forces in Morocco, but on the other hand, in its own territory, just 2 weeks ago, the Kabyles, who were in fact conquered and colonized, because the Algerians talk about colonization. The Kabyle people, the Berber people, were colonized by the Arabs in the 7th century. The Kabyle Republic declared its independence last week. It's a non-violent movement, and the Algerian government has been repressing this non-violent movement, denying its independence, but then it supports separatist forces in next door Morocco. So it goes to show again that this leadership is completely failed, and really France, it needs France more than France needs it.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Navon. Really fascinating to hear your take on this.